Let's talk onion seedling care today. I started my onion seeds 4 weeks ago. I have a mix of yellow and red onions. If you missed that video and want to know how to start onion seeds, I will link it here on the screen, I think in this top corner and in the description. But now that they're 4 weeks old and they're honestly doing quite well, I'm happy with the progress. I thought it was time to give you guys an update if you're in the same stage as me and you're kind of like, my seed sprouted, now what? Like, what do I do? When do I water? When do I fertilize? When do I trim? Basically everything. So today I want to get into how and when to trim your onions. I'm going to touch on the seed leaf dying back because I think for a new gardener that's kind of a bit of a scary thing to see. So I want to make sure to calm any of those fears you might have if you start seeing parts of your onion die. I'll go over watering, fertilizing. I'm going to be starting a fan pretty soon on them, so I'll go over that. And then I think that's it. I will also be covering the questions that I got on Instagram yesterday. I like to put a little question box on my Instagram story before filming these. That way you guys have the opportunity to enter any questions that you have on the topic, and then I can make sure I answer them in these videos to hit everything that you're wondering about. So if you want to be in on those, make sure you're following me at More Than Gardening on Instagram. So before we get into kind of like the bulk of how to care for them, I just want to give you like an overview of what they look like. These are my yellow onions. This next one is red, and then this one below is a half and half. I think it's this side is red, this side is yellow. One big learning I had this year was that old seeds do not germinate well. So you're gonna notice all of these onions here are really tall and they look great. And then these ones are tiny and short. Now this is because these are the seeds that were started 4 weeks ago, and these seeds were started about 2 weeks ago. Now, I originally planted the whole tray out 4 weeks ago, which you'll see if you watch that video, but on that side, that front side is where I did all of the old seeds from last year, and I knew the germination wasn't going to be as good as new seeds. However, I did not anticipate it being as pathetic as it was. The germination rate for last year's seeds was, I don't know, less than 50%. It was really, really bad. So I did go ahead and replant in those cells new seeds, and they're just coming up, and that's why they look a little shorter or much shorter than the ones that were planted 4 weeks ago. So I do have those ones on the yellow onions. I have throughout the other trays here and there sprinkled in new seeds too, so that's why you're going to see the differing in heights. The first thing I'm going to get into, and I'm going to do it, we'll use this tray for this video. I'm going to take it out because we are going to trim our onions, and trimming is exactly how it sounds. We're going to give them a haircut. Now, the reason that I'm going to trim them is I do not want my seedlings focusing on vertical growth. I don't want the greens growing far up. I don't want the plant to be putting energy into tall onions right now. They're just in their seedling phase. I want them to focus on their root system, and I want really strong roots. So the best way to do that is by cutting them, and then that will help divert the energy to the root system and growing the roots, and it'll deter them from like putting all that energy into growing taller and taller. Because when I start feeding these with fertilizer, I don't want that fertilizer going into height. I want it to go into the roots. So trimming these and keeping them smaller will just help divert that energy into the roots. Another thing is I don't want them flopping over. You're gonna see some of them are starting to lean, and that's because they're so top heavy and they don't have that root system yet. They're not strong enough to support themselves. And if they do fall over too much, they could uproot themselves and expose those roots. Like this one here is making me a little bit nervous. So I just need to give them a trim. It'll make them nice and tidy, and yeah, just a stronger seedling overall. So let's get into trimming them. So I start trimming these when they get to about 5 or 6 inches, and then I trim them down to about 3 inches. And I literally just use any clean pair of kitchen scissors that I have. And when you're trimming these, like, it's literally, don't make it too complicated. You just snip. And then everything that you snip off, you can eat. It's honestly just like a green onion or like a chive. I probably gonna compost these ones just because I don't really have, I don't know, an immediate need for them. But you can totally go ahead and eat these and let nothing go to waste. And you can see in some of these, it's like as soon as I cut them, they kind of just like firm up and tense up. And that is what I want to see because I want them to be nice and sturdy and straight up and stable. So I'm kind of going in one by one, but you could also, I don't know, you could go all in and just cut these all at once. And these smell really good. These are like the freshest kind of green onion that you're ever gonna get. And no, these are not. I had someone ask me actually once on Instagram if the tops of onions were green onions or if green onions were a separate plant. And yes, they are a separate plant. I'm just saying, like, these taste like green onions. But I'm just gonna go through here and chop all of these off at about 3 inches. And then I will do that on the other trays as well. And again, timing, it's not really an exact science. It's not like every 2 weeks I'm gonna trim my onions. It's just whenever they get to about 5 inches or so, or what I honestly do, as soon as I see them start to hit the lights above them, that's when I give them a trim. One thing to note, I will be trimming these every time they hit about 5 or 6 inches up until 2 weeks before I plant them out into my garden. Because every time you trim them, you'll notice that these leaves are hollow. It's a little circle you can see inside. At the small stage, it's not the biggest circle, but as they grow bigger, the opening is bigger and bigger as the leaves get wider. And I don't want them to be out in my garden with an opening on the leaf for water to get in, for disease to get in, for dirt to get in, or anything. I want them to be fully healed and then closed off, because as these onion tips heal from the trim they just got, they will reclose. And I want them to be closed when they're outside. So about 2 weeks before I'm going to transplant them, I stop trimming them. That way they are totally healed and shut. And then I'll plant them outside. And then once they're outside, I do not trim them anymore. Some gardeners do. They are fine with it and they've had luck with it. So I would recommend, if you're new to gardening, maybe trim half outside, don't trim the other half, see what works for you. But for me, I don't want to risk water getting in there and having any like mold situation. I don't want disease to get in there. I want the onions to be fully protected and I want the tips to be closed to the outside world. So trim them every time they get to about 5 or 6 inches, cut them down to about 3 inches, and do that up until 2 weeks before you're going to plant your onions out. You can probably see the difference a lot better now between this top row that I just trimmed and this bottom row that is in need for a trimming. So they're much lower from the lights now. They're not going to get burned. They're nice and a lot more straight up than they were. These ones over here are kind of still a little bit crazy, so I'm going to give them time to adjust, but overall they look a lot better. So the next thing I want to get into is the seed leaf dying off, because I think this is something that scared me the first time I grew onions, and a lot of you are going to start seeing if you're at this phase. So look at, I'm going to bring them even closer. These leaves here with the black tips on top, this is the seed. You can see all of these here, and they're starting to yellow from the top down. Now, this is a natural process in seedlings. Basically, when your seed sprouts, the first leaves that sprout are called the seed leaves, or I'm going to butcher how to say this. It's like the cotyledons, something like that. I will spell it on the screen. That's just the name for seed leaves. And when those sprout, they're what come out of the seeds. They have all the nutrients a plant needs to get to the seedling phase. And then once the true leaves start growing, those seed leaves are no longer needed and they die off. So that's why you see all of these over here starting to die. And you'll see they die from the seed down. So that's all that yellowing in there you see. So if you start to see the yellowing and you start to see these leaves die off, it's totally fine. It's a natural process. Eventually these are totally going to die back. They're going to shrivel up. See how this one is starting to shrivel? Completely normal. So if you see this happening on your seed leaf and then the rest of your onion plant is nice and green and tall and healthy, no need to worry about it. This is a natural process, and it usually starts to happen around the time that your second true leaf starts to form. So as long as the tips of your actual leaves aren't turning yellow and it's just the seed leaf turning yellow, you know, that first one that came up with the seed, your plants are fine and they're totally healthy, so don't worry about that. So your seed leaf dying off and your true leaves coming in is also another sign you want to look for when to start fertilizing. I like to start hitting my onions with a liquid fertilizer mixed into the water right around the time their second true leaf has established itself. My soil, which if you watch my last onion video, you know that I also mixed in worm castings and fertilizer into the soil. So they do have a little bit of nutrients already. So even though a lot of these have that second true leaf coming up, and this one here looks even a nice thickness to it, I'm actually going to hold off on watering. I already have some nutrients in the soil and I don't want to overwhelm them. If you don't have any nutrients in the soil and you just put them in like some plain old seed starting mix, I would probably recommend to start fertilizing now. If you followed a similar mix to me and mixed in fertilizer into the soil, I would wait like a couple more weeks. I mix my fertilizer in with my water. So I use a liquid fertilizer. I will link it in the description. It's a fish emulsion. It smells terrible. I'm gonna warn you, that's my one disclaimer. It does not smell good. I find that the stench goes away a little bit after watering. And honestly, the fertilizer is so good that I just deal with it. There's probably other ones out on the market that don't stink as bad. If you have any recommendations, I would love to have them in the comment section, but I am just going to keep using what I use because it does work so well. So I will link that one. And basically what I would do for fertilizing is whatever the directions are on your fertilizer, I would do about 25% of that. So if your fertilizer says mix 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, I would mix in a 1/4 tablespoon per gallon of water because again, they're so young, they're seedlings. They don't need a ton of fertilizer. You don't want to burn the roots. You just need a little bit. So I would do about 1/4 of what the fertilizer is telling you to do for an established plant. And once I do start fertilizing, I will do it every other week. So I water once a week. That's what works for me. That's what works for these size trays. I will link these trays, both these 6 cells that my onions are in, these ones, and I will link these bottom trays in the description. And I have found for me what works is one of these jars, which this is 1,500 milliliters or 6 cups, and then I overfill it to the 7-cup mark. I do one of these per tray per week, and that's what works for me. I keep getting stabbed by this one. It might not work for you. It's kind of dependent on how many plants you have, how packed your soil is, what your humidity is in the room your plants are in, the temperature, how big your plants are, how much water they're taking in. Like, it's not going to be the same for everybody, but my general recommendation is about once a week. Deep watering is good for onions. I do every 7 days. However, a sign to look for if they're like really desperate for water is if they all lay down one day and are completely horizontal, laying flat. That means they're really thirsty. So you're going to want to get water to them sooner. Another way to just get like a good pulse check on if they need water or not is you can take one of your seed cells out and poke your finger into it. And if it's dry about 1 inch down, they need water. Also, these ones have little slits on the side that go all the way up to here, which is part of the reason I love these ones because it gives me visibility into my soil really, really far up. So I can see if the soil's dry in this like little slit, then I know that they're thirsty. And if it's dark and it's wet, then I know they don't need water. So I do one of these once a week, and I'm going to show you. It's really simple. I just pop one of these out and I pour my jar into the tray, the whole thing. And then I pop this one back in. And then my floor is not level. This room is, honestly, it's like a roller coaster of concrete, the base. So I have to give these trays a little tip to make sure the water gets everywhere. But you'll see these onions are just going to suck up all that water. And bottom watering is the ideal way to water your seedlings, not just onions, any seedlings you're growing, because it forces the roots to stretch down and find the water. If you're watering just on the surface, you're not making the roots like grow downwards and expand and search for that water. And I find that they just have a really strong root system when they're made to work a little bit for it and reach downwards. Also, I like to keep the top of my soil as dry as I can, because when your soil is wet, that's kind of like when fungus happens and mold happens, and you can get fungus gnats and damping off, and just diseases like to breed on the surface of your soil and kill your seedlings. So I do try to keep the top of the soil dry, with one exception. When I have new seedlings popping up like this one right here, let me show you. Actually, I'll show you these ones. These new ones up here, their roots are going to be so shallow that I do give them an additional little spritz of water. That way I know that their roots are getting at least a little bit of a taste, to make sure that they're getting some water if they don't reach all the way down to get that water. But that's my watering schedule every 7 days. I bottom water. I do about 7 cups per tray. And that seems to work for me. Every other week, I will start mixing in a little bit of fertilizer once these get a little bit bigger, probably in about 2 weeks or so. In addition to trimming them, bottom watering, and fertilizing them, another thing I'm gonna do to make sure they're nice and strong is I'm gonna start running a fan on them about 2 to 3 times a week, and I'll run that fan all day long. I use just like a big box fan, and I have a table right in front of these grow shelves that I just set it on. I also in the past have used smaller fans that you like clip onto the side here, and then they rotate, and then they just blow on the seedlings. Either will work just fine, but that little element of wind makes sure that the seedlings are getting just stronger and more robust overall, because if you think about it right now, they're in the most perfect conditions growing inside. There's no pest pressure, there's no wind, there's no rain, there's literally nothing impacting or hindering their growth. But once they go outside, they're gonna have to deal with storms, wind, rain, pests, everything. So just one small thing you can do to help make sure they're prepared for that and make sure they're growing nice and strong is introducing little elements of the outdoors to them while they're young. So one thing being wind, you can run a fan on them, and that will help strengthen the seedlings overall. So around the same time that I'm gonna start fertilizing, which is probably gonna be in about 2 weeks, once all of my seedlings have a nice strong second leaf coming in, is I will grab my fan and I'll start running it all day long for 2 to 3 days throughout the week. Now I want to get into the questions that you guys submitted on Instagram. Quite a few of them were very specific about lighting. Now I use these shelves, they came with these grow lights, I'll link them in the description. And some of my shelves have 2 lights, some of them only have 1 light. And a lot of the times the ones that only have 1 light that go through the middle, you'll see that the outside seedlings that aren't directly under that light might start to lean like this a little bit and lean towards that light. Honestly, it's not the biggest deal in the world. If you do see that happening and you want to help your seedlings a little bit and stop that, what you can do is just take the seedlings that are on the outside or right here, and then I just pull the one in the back forward, and then I would put this one here. And that basically makes it so that the seedlings that were on the outside going in are now moved into the middle, and they're gonna be across like this. And then since they're right under the light, they'll even out and be straight up and down. Another question I got was specific to the distance from the lights that I keep my onions. I did measure these beforehand. Honestly, I don't have an exact science for this. All of my shelves compared to my lights are about 8 to 10 inches away. And I find that works, especially after I trim them. Having the lights maybe about 3 to 4 inches above them is what works for me. If you start to see the tips of your onions burning, not the seed leaf, remember the seed leaf's gonna die, but the tips of your actual true leaves starting to burn. Actually, this one's burning, so great, I can show you. See how this tip right here, I don't know if you can see, I really hope you can, the very tip of it is yellowing. This one's way too close to the light, and I know that because it's literally been in the light for a couple days because it's due to be trimmed. But if you see that on your true leaves, that means your lights are way too close and you can move them up. If you don't see that, you're probably fine. I like to, sorry, my camera's being crazy. I like to just have them about 3 to 4 inches above my onions, but honestly, you don't really have to overthink that part too much. Another question I got was about transplanting. I know a lot of seedlings, you will start in these little cells and then you'll pot them up into a bigger pot and then you'll put them outside. Onions are the only crop that I don't pot up. These will live in these cells up until the time that they go in the garden. There'll be no potting up process for my onions. And then a lot of the other questions I got were around variety of onions, which onion seeds I'm growing, and timing. A lot of that info is in my onion seed starting video, which again, I will link, but just high level, again, I'm here in Michigan, zone 6A. I'm growing long day onions, which are the yellow onions, intermediate day, which are the red onions. I started these seeds on January 4th. I will plant them out into my garden last week of March or first week of April, depending on the local weather. It's recommended usually about 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost you want to plant them out. If you do plant them later than I did, like I did January 4th, if you're seeing this video right now and you want to get started planting end of January, early February, and you're the same zone as me, honestly, it's totally fine. Last year I planted my seeds the last weekend of January, I think, which would be right now when I'm filming, and my onions did great. So if you're a little behind compared to my schedule, don't worry about it. I would still plant them. That should cover everything for seedling care. If there's anything that I missed that you want to know, make sure to leave a comment. And if you like this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel for more gardening content. Make sure you're following me on Instagram at morethangardening, TikTok at morethangardening_. I will link below my garden planner. I know a lot of you guys got that based on my last onion video and my garden planning video, and you guys are loving it to use to start planning out your garden. So I will link that below. But if there's anything else you want to see in further videos, let me know in the comment section. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.